So I know what you're thinking. Wait, you have two different 40K armies? Nice. Alright, this might be a long one, but I'm going to show you how I did not one, but two Lehman Russes with lights and sound. Let's get to it. So the first step here is I'm going to just put a nice flat surface back here and get a hole all the way through so I can put in a 2835 LED. That's one of the bigger chip sizes that you can get. Next step, I'm going to take some epoxy resin with a little bit of white pigment in it so I can diffuse the light. I'm going to put one of these in each of the main gun barrels. For the battle cannon, I want to make sure that the light is behind both of the muzzle brakes so you actually see the light coming through the side of the gun as well as through the front. Then I went ahead and put them in a third hand like this so that they can cure. And that'll bring us to the rest of the guns. I chose heavy bolters for all of the other weapon options, especially with heavy bolters doing 2 damage now. They seem pretty good. I'm not sure now that I've built it whether or not I'd actually put sponsons on it or not, but for these tanks I put sponsons on them. So you want to make sure you're going really slow with this, try to get as straight as you can, and make sure that you always leave a space so if the drill does punch through, it doesn't stab you. And that's pretty much how I did all of these. For the little gun mounts that the heavy bolters go into, I drilled a much bigger hole just in the back just to get roughly where the heavy bolter holes are coming out. I just want to make sure at the end of the day that I can get wires through these so I can wire it all up into the Arduino that we're going to be using. That'll bring us to actually wiring in the LEDs into these little tiny barrels. Now I used some pre-wired 0603 LEDs that I got. All the links for all of these LEDs will be in the description so you can see what I'm using. But the key with this was I wanted to have the light to be a little bit diffused, so there's a little bit of that white pigment in there, but I also wanted to make sure that I'm not obscuring any of the muzzle brakes or anything else. So I'm pushing these in and using toothpicks to clean up any of that excess glue, and that'll give us a really nice clean muzzle brake look. Okay, and some footage had to get cut somewhere to make this a reasonably length video. So I went ahead and I soldered all of the LEDs to colored wires so I know what wire is what when I put them all into the Cthulhu that will be the inside of this tank later. So in the back of these tanks there's the nice little access hatch for the engine, and they typically have some little venting holes and stuff. So I'm actually going to remove all of that plastic there and I'm going to replace it with a brass photo etch so I can actually have some holes to put the speaker behind. To cut these out I used a little photo etch saw blade that fits into the X-Acto blade handle. I don't know where I got them from and I since have not been able to find them, but a jeweler saw would probably be your next best option. Next step is to get this photo etch in here. I've taken a little piece of cardstock and I've cut it out to the rough shape and size that I need. And here I am test fitting it, and I'm actually going to cut it down. And this will be the template that I use for all of the Lehman Russes that I'm doing with sound in them. This mesh is from Green Stuff World. I'll leave a link in the description for that as well. Now that I have these bits cut out, it's time to actually glue these in place. You can see I've already put the front heavy bolter in place on this hull right here. But I just got to do one more test fit, make sure these are all good. I've got a pair of scissors here to trim them down if they're not fitting well. So we're going to super glue this mesh into place now that it's looking good. And then we're going to move on to the button and the switch. So the switch is a hard on and off switch that'll just be directly linked to the battery. So when the tank is on, it's on, and when it's off, there's no connection to the battery. And the push button is going to be wired to the Arduino to actually initiate the code that will make the flashy lights happen. So now I'm actually using green stuff to secure both the switch and the button. The reason I'm using green stuff is there'll be no glue seeping through and stopping the button from working anymore or stopping the switch from sliding anymore. We'd really like both of those things to continue happening so this tank actually does fun stuff. That'll bring us to the access hatch. I want to be able to make sure I can get in here and change the batteries if I need to and maybe do some other work or something. So here's what I'm going to go for. I took a piece of sprues and I've screwed into those with some hinges, and this is going to be able to open and close. I'm going to use a magnetic closure here in the end, but first step is going to take these calipers and I'm going to measure out the square or the rectangle that I want to cut in this, and this will give me a decent little scratch mark that I can follow, so I have consistency between all of these. Not that it matters too much. And I'm also going to make sure that I get a hole cut out in the back here for all the wires to come through from our little storage box or whatever it is that has our button and our switch in it. I'm using calipers to make all of these markings on the back of this tank and the bottom for the hatch. Calipers are a tool that I did not think that I needed for many a year, but since I've bought them, I've used them for so many different projects, it's pretty insane. And once I have all the lines marked out, I went ahead and I drilled a hole in each of the corners so I can get this jeweler's saw or piercing saw through to actually make all of the cuts that I want. I plan on doing a video on just how to use a jeweler's saw and a bench block because I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't know, so stay tuned for that. And once the bottoms are cut out, I've moved to the side here to do these little holes to let all the wires come through. Now this is where you have to get a little bit creative on your bench block and kind of move it around to make sure that you're supporting it. Back and forth to different angles is really the only way to get this done. And that brings us back to the table. I'm going to go ahead and deburr all of these panels that came out from the bottom. And you may notice in this video I've left my desk pretty messy. This was a pretty intense project. And I've actually been kind of putting this off because there's so much editing to do. I did way more footage than really was required for this. Not only am I trying to deburr all of these edges, I'm also trying to make some clearance. I want a little bit of space between both of these panels so they actually can open and close. So now I'm going to go through and pilot hole drill into the piece of plastic card that I glued to the other side for the hinge. And you need to leave a little extra space on the hinge side so the actual pin of the hinge has someplace to go. One more thing to complete on the inside of this tank is going to be the speaker box. So where this little engine compartment comes down from the inside of the tank, I'm going to close this off into a little box area where I can stick a speaker to the outside of that. A speaker box will allow the sound to get amplified a little bit before it actually leaves your model and gives you a little bit better sound than just having a speaker set up against the mesh there. Now the plastic card is all cut out and it looks like it's fitting pretty well. I need to go back to the bench block with the jeweler saw and cut out a nice oval for the speaker to fit into. I'm pretty sure you don't want to watch me do all of this cutting though. That brings us to the closures. So what I'm going to do to make these actually open and close is take a little bit of a picture hanger tab. They're used to hold pictures like into the back of a frame. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to glue that in place with a nail head here with some epoxy so it doesn't fall off. And then that's going to attach to a magnet on the other side. Now, in the end, I've bent the tip of this just a little bit so I can get a fingernail under there to actually open the bottom plate of the tank. But so far, that's worked really well for me. Huge shocker, this nerd loves spreadsheets. I've used the color coding to make sure I know which wire is what, as well as what pins they're supposed to go to, and the resistor values are also calculated through the spreadsheet. So to test this all works, I actually use Tinkercad. So these are my 3 heavy bolters. This is my main gun here. These are just random resistor values. It doesn't really matter for this. I put positive and negative here, even though I'm only really taking everything to ground. And then all the pins are right here for all of the different things that I'm actually going to do with this. I'm going to do a whole video on just Arduino and Arduino coding because that is such a big topic that it needs its own video. But as you can see, when you hit the button, they do light up, they do have a sequence. The main cannon here is actually a PWM or pulse width modulation, and for some reason that never gets to full brightness on the simulation, but that proves that the code works. So here are the Arduinos, here are some resistors, and here's the Cthulhu bottom of the tank, as it were. Which is why I have the spreadsheet to make sure I can keep track of all of this stuff. So the green wires are all just going straight to ground. The yellow is from the main gun. The blue is from the machine guns. And for no good reason, the button is also yellow wire. So that was kind of a mistake on my side. I have enough colors. I don't know why I used yellow twice. But the red and black are going straight to battery, and that also involves the switch. So assuming you don't want to see all of the footage of just the back of my head, that brings us to this state here. I've shrink wrapped all of the wires, making sure that nothing is going to be touching other stuff. I've also used a large piece of shrink wrap around the whole Arduino, so that doesn't short out on anything. And this larger board here is the Soundboard, the same as in the video that I'll link right here that I used for the dice box. You can look up sound files that are in WAV or OGG that'll go on the Soundboard and get pretty much any sound that you might want. So the next step was to fit the batteries and everything else in here. And, well, that didn't go very well. After quite a few choice words, I was able to cut the outside armor panel off because the tracks hadn't been glued on yet, and cut a hole so I could actually utilize the space in between those 2 armor plates. So for power, I've taken these 14500 batteries and I've put them into a double AA holder. These will actually fit in the same spot as a AA. And I put a Dean's plug on this. And this will plug straight into the bottom of my tank here. I've made these removable so I can recharge them and have spares if I need to. So you just got to plug this sucker in now and then fiddle a little bit to get this in. Now, I painted this the same way I paint any of my other tanks. Didn't do anything different about the LEDs, except in the end I came back with isopropyl alcohol and cleaned off any paint that was on the LEDs. And that brings us to having 2 complete Leman Russ tanks. I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed the process that I went through to make these, and I hope that you try to do something like this yourself. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.